Hey Facebook group, it's me, Gretchen. Just wanted to check in. Welcome all new members. If you haven't watched the first two videos, we did one on differentiation and guided math. Those tended to be the two big questions folks had when they entered the group. Well, since then, we have had tons of new friends join us, and guided reading seems to be the #1 burning question. So I wanted to hop on here just for a few minutes and chat with you about my experience with guided reading and how it's worked for me. And then in the comments of the video, shoot me all your questions because I know you've got tons and you might want to start from scratch about how to reorganize things or how to better get materials and just keep up with the time. I've already shared a blog post that I found that I thought would be very helpful for you to read just to save you time and keep you from going crazy with guided reading groups. So make sure you check that out. So my experience is with Fountas in Pinnell reading levels. If you haven't, or at least if your school isn't using that program, that is totally okay. But I'm going to explain how we use that program, and it may be something similar to what you're doing, and it could also give you ideas for what to do. Those of you who do use the program, this is great to kind of compare and contrast what your school's doing or what your classroom's needs are in comparison to what I've done. So Fountas and Pinnell are just two people that put together a leveled reading system. And so the first thing that you do is get all your students together. Well, you do it one-on-one, but you create running records based on these leveled stories that again come with this curriculum. And so generally what I do is when students are independently reading, I'll pull one student into the hallway or to the back table, and we start at whatever level that they should be reading for this grade level. So I taught third and they were supposed to be on a level P. And so I'd start there, and if that was way too hard, they were making tons of mistakes, then I dropped down to the level below, and all my books were right out on the table because I knew I wanted a few books leading up to level P and a few books over P in case they were advanced. And if I didn't have the materials right then and there and I needed to take this child another time, that was totally fine. I made a note to myself. But basically you listen to them read for just a minute and you make notes about how well they did, and then you ask them comprehension questions, because what I've realized, some students are very fluent readers but they have zero idea what they just read, especially when they're reading out loud, because they're very focused on how they're sounding and not so much on the content that they're reading. So while the other students are independently reading, you're pulling students to do this. For me, sometimes it takes like a week to get through everybody just to find out what their levels are, because you think they're going to be one level and then you have to keep going down or keep going up, and so it may take a while to kind of solve some of that puzzle. Now, if you've had guided reading in your school for a while, what's helpful is you can look at the grades from the previous year and say, hey, what was their level? And we had cumulative folders. I don't know if you have those same ones, but we always wrote the level that they ended on. Note to self, when the summer comes, some students slide back a level, and that's totally normal. Or like right now, it's going to be Christmas break, and some students may lose a level as well just because they didn't keep up their reading. So take it with a grain of salt, but it is a good place to start knowing, where they were reading before. You don't have to start from scratch. And so once you've kind of got your running records together and you've decided, okay, who is what level, you just have a roster with their name and the letter of whatever their reading level is. And then you start pulling materials. We had a whole room in our library that had tons of books based on the level. There were baskets of collections. So there was like 6 to 7 kids in a group ideally. And I'd say, okay, I need 6 level Ps, 2 level Ms, or whatever. I'd go find these stories. And that's the story we'd work on for the week. Sometimes it took a little bit more, especially as you get more advanced. Some third graders were into some chapter books, so that took us a while. And then once I had my materials, I knew my groups, I created a smartboard slide. And so that was more for me to know who was going where and what day they were going to be doing what. And then it was great for the students. All I had to do was project it up there. Hey, today's Monday. I'm meeting with the yellow group, and yellow group is this story, because the kids didn't really know, hey, this book on the railroad is a level M. They have no idea. So I would just put the title of the book up there. That was really to let me know what it was. And the students would come back to my small group table. Again, everybody else is independently reading, and we would start wherever we stopped off from the last time, and I would listen to students read. You don't want to do choral reading the whole time, and you don't want to do round robin reading the whole time. You want to do a mix. So my formula when I'm sitting with my group is I introduce this skill. I made the mistake of using the books to teach students, and I got so into the content of the story that I was like, what skill am I actually teaching today? And I didn't. I just taught like the main idea of the story and the different events, and that's not a skill. So I had to make sure that I was really focused. So I started every lesson just like you would announce an objective, and I say, okay, today we're working on sequencing or whatever. And so today when we're reading this chapter or this book, that's what we're going to focus on, is how to put these events in order and why they're important to the storyline, whatever. And sometimes I'd had students read independently while I worked one-on-one with someone in the group, or we do whisper read where I'd listen behind them as they were all whispering at the same time at different points in the story, and I'm just kind of like listening to see if there's any common mistakes, what growth there was from the students reading before. Sometimes they do round robin, maybe just for 5 minutes, where one student reads for a few minutes, the next student, and the next student, and I try to keep it unpredictable so they don't know it's like in order. But then also it's great for them to chorally read together, like, okay, let's take this next 2 sentences and read this together, just to build fluency and camaraderie, and that's really great. But the whole point of the guided reading group is to teach students a skill with a book that's on their level. Meaning like it's an instructional level, so it's a little bit above where they can independently work, because when they go off by themselves, that's where they're going to read something that's of comfort to them in terms of their level. They don't need help. They're probably not going to have a lot of questions, but when they're with you, it's a little challenge. You're there to help them with vocabulary and these skills like I was talking about, and then they go off and practice whatever that skill was while they're independently reading with their own books. So those books they use during guided readings stay with you. And students can have an assignment sometimes. You may say, hey, read this next, especially if it's a chapter book, next chapter, and come ready to discuss. And that's turning more into like small reading groups of students independently doing assignments, and that may not be where you are. So I'm going to leave that where it is. Just know that you have to make sure you're really focusing on skills. And I made a list of some of the most popular ones. So main idea, sequencing, inferencing, character traits, theme, cause and effect, etc. So those would be some skills. So as you're with these groups, you're going to have some data that you're going to collect based on, okay, what the story was, what are some of the problems you're noticing students having. And in the group, I put a guided reading resource. It's kind of like a lesson plan outline, but it's a place for you to gather data based on what you're seeing from students. And that's really important because that tracks their growth as a reader, lets you know trends that you're noticing within all your groups, because that can be a mini lesson later. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, mini lesson, that's about how to structure your entire literacy block. Guided reading is just one portion. I do have a product in my store that I sell to teachers to teach them how to set up their literacy block, and I'll put that in the comments of this video if you're interested. But a trend that you might see is something that you just want to introduce to the whole class, like, hey, I'm noticing this is going on. This is what the skill is. This is how to tackle it as a reader. Let me model it for you. Let's do it together and practice. And now you're going to go off and independently read and practice it with your own book. So they're constantly reading familiar text, but the skills are what's changing. So it's like, oh, I've read this book before. Totally okay. Now we're taking it from a new perspective. Now we're looking at through a lens of cause and effect. And so it's really interesting for them to revisit some of their favorite text in a new way. So you want to make sure, again, running records are really important, getting your groups together and going and getting all those books, which can be a stressful situation. I always did it at the end of the day on Friday so that all next week was set up, and I had a little bin. It was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday groups, and I would try and see 2 groups at a time. So it would be 20 minutes with one group, and then I'd break for 5 minutes and go out and see what everyone independently is doing, and then my second group I would come, and that was kind of our guided reading block. But it's up to you with how your schedule works. Again, make sure you're focusing on skills and not just the topic of the book. That was a mistake I made, and I'm gonna make sure I never do it again. So know what your skill is, and that will be apparent to you when you're leveling students. You're like, wow, these kids are really struggling when they're retelling you stuff. Oh, wow, they don't know like how to describe a character. I'm gonna work with them on character traits. So that's how you can do that. But your curriculum might also tell you this is the skill you're working on, and that's totally fine because sequencing can be level A to Z if you're using Fountas and Pinnell. That skill doesn't matter. It's not like just specific for one reading level. It's something that everyone can be working on because the complexity of the text is what's changing and making it more challenging. So make sure you gather your data, whether it's informally and formally, because you're going to swap out your students as they're growing, and you're going to swap out your materials. Say, hey, this was a level P, but I think we need to go up a level. I'm going to find some new resources, a new book, a level up to challenge you guys next week. And so that's what you want, to see your students growing through the levels that work just like an alphabet, A to Z. So that's really exciting too. And I think that I've said that all. So running records, make groups, teach skills, gather data, adjust groups, and use that information to make your mini lesson. I have my little cheat sheet right here to remind me to say everything. Okay, so now it's time for you to stop watching this video, jump in the comments, and leave any questions you have about your school or about the resources you have, about how to set this up, about your specific students. I'm sure a lot of your questions are about organization and just how to get through everybody and how to pair people that aren't the same reading level or whatever, and that's totally fine. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what's worked for me, and then give me your specific questions and I will go ahead and answer them. All right, I hope you guys have a great holiday break and an excellent 2018. Bye.